Hello everyone. Have you ever wondered why people in the Middle Ages often slept with a weapon beside their bed? Not because they expected a fight every night, but because the darkness outside their homes could hide dangers we rarely imagine today. Tonight, we'll quietly step into the medieval night, where strange sounds, wandering travellers, and unseen threats made even sleep feel uncertain. And before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you truly enjoy the stories I share here. Imagine lying down to sleep in a medieval village after a long day of work. The sun has disappeared behind the hills, darkness slowly covers the fields, and the only light comes from a few weak candles flickering inside wooden homes. There are no streetlights outside, no police patrols, no emergency services, and certainly no locked, well-guarded neighborhoods like many people are used to today. In that quiet darkness, the night could feel deeply peaceful, but it could also feel dangerously uncertain. For this reason, many medieval people slept with weapons nearby, sometimes placing them right beside their beds, or even holding them within arm's reach. To modern people, this might seem extreme or paranoid, but for people living centuries ago, it was simply common sense and part of everyday survival. The medieval world was a place where danger could arrive quickly, and without warning. Villages were often surrounded by forests, open fields, and poorly guarded roads. Bandits and travelling criminals sometimes moved through these regions, especially at night when visibility was low and people were most vulnerable. Small homes made of wood or mud offered little protection. If someone attempted to break in, a locked door might slow an intruder, but it would rarely stop someone determined to enter. Because of this, keeping a weapon nearby during sleep gave people a sense of security and readiness. If something strange happened in the night, a noise at the door, footsteps outside, or an animal disturbing the yard, they could wake up and defend themselves immediately. Many medieval households owned simple weapons that doubled as tools. A dagger, a small sword, a spear, or even a heavy staff could serve both practical and defensive purposes. Farmers who spent the day working the land might already have tools that could easily become weapons if needed. These items were not always meant for battle in the dramatic sense people see in movies, but they were enough to protect a home against thieves or intruders. Because danger could arrive quickly, people believed it was wise to keep these objects close while sleeping, rather than stored far away. Another reason weapons were kept nearby at night was the fear of animals. Many villages were located near forests filled with wolves, wild dogs, boars, and other creatures that could occasionally wander close to human settlements. Livestock such as chickens, goats, or sheep were valuable resources, and predators sometimes came looking for easy food. A sudden disturbance outside the house could mean an animal threatening the family's animals, or even attempting to enter the home itself. If that happened, having a weapon ready meant the difference between protecting one's livelihood and losing it overnight. In addition to animals and criminals, there was also the reality of local conflicts and unrest. Medieval life was not always peaceful. Small disputes between neighbouring villages, travelling soldiers passing through the countryside, or sudden political tensions could create unpredictable situations. In times of instability, People were especially cautious at night. Rumors could spread quickly through communities, warning of raids or violence nearby. When people heard such stories, it became even more common for families to sleep with weapons within reach, just in case something happened while they were most vulnerable. Homes themselves were not designed for strong defense. Many medieval houses were small, built with simple materials, and had thin walls or weak doors. Windows were often little more than openings covered with shutters or cloth. If someone wanted to enter a house forcefully, it was not particularly difficult. Because of this, people relied more on personal readiness than structural protection. A weapon placed near the bed acted as a final layer of security if someone managed to get inside. There was also a strong cultural mindset around preparedness and self-defense. Medieval communities understood that survival depended on being ready for hardship. Life was uncertain, and people learned from childhood to take responsibility for protecting themselves and their families. Fathers might teach their sons how to handle a blade or spear, and young men were often expected to practice basic weapon skills. Sleeping with a weapon nearby was simply another reflection of this mindset. It was not necessarily a sign of constant fear, but rather a practical habit formed by generations living in a less secure world. Night itself also contributed to the sense of danger. Without artificial lighting, medieval nights were incredibly dark. Once the candles burned low and fires dimmed, the outside world became almost invisible. Sounds carried farther in the silence, and unfamiliar noises could easily cause alarm. A sudden knock, a creaking door, or the howl of a distant animal could wake someone instantly. When people woke up to such sounds, they wanted the reassurance of having a weapon within reach before investigating what had caused the disturbance. Interestingly, many medieval laws and traditions also expected ordinary people to participate in defense. In some regions, villagers were required to own basic weapons so they could help protect their community if needed. This meant weapons were already common household items, rather than rare objects reserved only for soldiers. Because they were part of daily life, it was natural for people to keep them nearby, even while resting. The design of beds and sleeping arrangements also played a role. Many people slept in shared spaces with family members, sometimes all in the same room. If danger appeared at night, everyone in the household needed to respond quickly. A weapon near the bed allowed the head of the household, or anyone awake, to act immediately. In some cases, a sword might hang on the wall near the bed, or a dagger might be placed under a pillow or beside a wooden bed frame. Of course, not every medieval person expected a nightly attack, and many nights passed quietly without incident. But the habit of sleeping near a weapon offered peace of mind. It was a simple precaution in a world where help could not arrive quickly and survival often depended on one's own actions. Unlike modern times, there were no emergency numbers to call and no guarantee that neighbours could respond in time. If danger came, it was up to the people inside the home to handle it. Over time, this habit became deeply ingrained in medieval culture. Stories, traditions, and practical experience all reinforced the idea that night was a time to remain cautious. Weapons near the bed symbolized readiness, responsibility, and the determination to protect one's family and home. Even travelers staying in unfamiliar places sometimes kept their weapons close while sleeping, especially in inns or roadside shelters where strangers might be nearby. When we imagine medieval life today, It is easy to picture castles, knights, and grand battles. But the reality for most people was far more ordinary and far more uncertain. The simple act of placing a weapon beside the bed was not about heroism or drama. It was about survival in a world where safety could never be taken completely for granted. So when night fell across the quiet villages of the medieval world, and families settled into their beds beneath dim candlelight, many of them rested knowing that a blade, staff, or spear waited within reach. Not because they expected danger every night, but because they understood that in their world being prepared could mean the difference between a peaceful sleep and a desperate struggle in the dark. Even beyond the fear of criminals or wild animals, the simple uncertainty of medieval nights played a powerful role in why people kept weapons close while they slept. Darkness in the medieval world was far deeper than what people experience today. Once the fire in the hearth faded and candles burned out, the night outside became nearly impenetrable. Without lamps lining the roads or electric light glowing through windows, the countryside could disappear into complete blackness. Shapes were hard to distinguish, sounds were amplified, and even familiar surroundings could feel unfamiliar. In that environment, a sudden noise could send a jolt of fear through an entire household. A creaking door, a shifting beam in the roof, or footsteps on gravel outside might be nothing, or it might be the first warning of danger. Having a weapon nearby meant that a person could wake up and respond instantly, instead of scrambling around in the dark trying to find something to defend themselves. Travelers and merchants passing through villages added another layer of unpredictability to medieval life. Roads were busy with traders, pilgrims, messengers, and wandering labourers moving from place to place. While many travellers were harmless, villagers could not always know the intentions of strangers who arrived after sunset. Inns and guest houses were sometimes crowded with unfamiliar people sharing the same sleeping space. In such places, it was common for travellers to keep their knives, swords, or staffs beside them while they slept. This was not necessarily because they distrusted everyone around them, but because the road had taught them to remain cautious. Stories of theft in crowded inns were not uncommon, and a traveller who woke up without their belongings could find themselves stranded far from home. Even within villages themselves, disputes could sometimes turn violent. Medieval communities were tightly connected, but they were not always peaceful. Arguments over land boundaries, livestock, debts, or personal insults could simmer for long periods, while many disagreements were resolved through community leaders or local courts. Tension sometimes remained beneath the surface. In rare cases, conflicts erupted suddenly, especially after dark, when people were more vulnerable. As the medieval night deepened, and the last traces of twilight faded from the sky, the world outside a village home became almost completely silent. Inside, the faint glow of a dying fire or a single candle might illuminate rough wooden walls, simple furniture, and the sleeping forms of family members resting after a long day of labour. Yet even in this calm moment, many people kept a weapon within reach. It was not because danger was guaranteed, but because medieval life had taught people that the unexpected could happen at any time, especially in the quiet hours of the night when everyone was most vulnerable. One important reason was the simple reality that medieval people slept much lighter than many people do today. Modern life often allows individuals to sleep deeply in well-insulated homes with stable temperatures and minimal outside noise. Medieval houses were very different. Cold air could slip through gaps in walls. Animals moved around nearby, and sounds from outside carried easily through thin wooden doors. Because of this, people were used to waking up quickly at the slightest disturbance. If someone heard movement outside, a sudden knock, or even a suspicious whisper near the window, they could wake instantly. Having a weapon beside the bed allowed them to react without hesitation, transforming a moment of fear into a moment of preparedness. Medieval communities also understood that criminals often preferred to act at night. Darkness gave thieves the advantage of concealment, and most households were asleep, making them easier targets. Unlike modern burglars who might rely on technology or complex planning, medieval thieves often used simple methods, such as forcing open doors or climbing through windows. Once inside, they could quickly gather valuables and disappear into the darkness before anyone fully understood what was happening. For this reason, people believed that if they woke during the night and sensed something unusual, they had to be ready to confront the threat immediately. There were also times when traveling soldiers or displaced groups moved through the countryside unexpectedly. Wars and conflicts were common throughout the medieval period, and armies sometimes passed through rural areas without warning. Even if a particular village was not directly involved in a conflict, the presence of armed strangers nearby could create tension. Villagers sometimes feared that soldiers might take supplies, livestock, or shelter by force. In such uncertain times, families slept cautiously, keeping weapons close, not out of aggression, but out of a desire to protect themselves if circumstances turned dangerous. Another overlooked reason for sleeping near weapons was the protection of family members themselves. Many medieval homes contained several generations living together, parents, children, and sometimes elderly relatives all sharing the same space. If danger appeared during the night, it was usually the responsibility of the strongest adult, often the head of the household, to respond first. A weapon nearby allowed that person to act immediately, protecting everyone else who might still be asleep or too frightened to react. In this sense, the weapon was not just for personal safety, but for the safety of the entire family. Weather and natural conditions could also create moments of alarm. Powerful storms sometimes struck unexpectedly, shaking roofs and rattling doors. Strong winds could break branches or send loose objects crashing into walls. When someone woke suddenly to loud noises during a storm, their first instinct might be to reach for the weapon beside the bed before stepping outside to investigate the disturbance. The weapon provided confidence in moments when it was unclear whether the noise came from the weather or from something more threatening. There was also a strong psychological dimension to this practice. In a world where survival often depended on one's own actions, people developed habits that reinforced a sense of control over their surroundings. Keeping a weapon nearby during sleep served as a quiet reminder that even in the darkest hours, they were not helpless. This feeling of preparedness allowed people to rest more peacefully, knowing that if they woke to danger, they would not face it unarmed. Medieval literature and oral storytelling sometimes reflected this mindset. Tales passed down through generations often included scenes where a character woke in the middle of the night to confront a mysterious threat. Whether the story involved a thief, a rival, or a wild animal, the hero was often described reaching for a weapon before stepping into the darkness. These stories did more than entertain. They reinforced the cultural expectation that vigilance and readiness were virtues. The layout of medieval homes also made it practical to keep weapons nearby. Most houses were small, and there were few places to store belongings. Tools and personal items were often kept in the same room where people slept. A sword might hang from a peg on the wall, a staff might lean against a beam, or a dagger might rest on a small table. Because space was limited, the place where someone slept naturally became the place where important possessions, including weapons, were stored. Another factor was the unpredictability of human behavior during difficult times. Periods of famine, economic hardship, or political unrest sometimes pushed desperate individuals toward crime. When food was scarce, some people might attempt to steal from others simply to survive. Villagers understood this reality and took precautions during such times. Sleeping with a weapon nearby was one of the simplest ways to prepare for situations that might arise from desperation. Interestingly, this habit was not limited to men alone. While men were often expected to defend the household, women in medieval society were also capable of protecting themselves when necessary. Historical accounts sometimes describe women using knives, staffs, or other tools to defend their homes when men were absent or away working. Because of this, weapons in the household were not exclusively tied to one person. They were part of the shared responsibility of survival. As midnight passed and the village remained quiet, most families slept undisturbed, their weapons never leaving their resting places beside the bed. But their presence still mattered. They represented preparedness, caution, and the understanding that safety was something people had to maintain for themselves. When morning finally arrived and sunlight spread across the fields, the tension of the night faded. Weapons were returned to their usual roles as tools or symbols of readiness. Life continued with farming, trade, and daily routines. Yet when evening returned and darkness once again settled over the land, many people quietly repeated the same habit, placing a weapon within reach before lying down to rest. It was a small act, almost invisible in the rhythm of everyday life, but it revealed something important about the medieval world. Safety was never taken for granted. Preparedness was woven into ordinary routines, and in the quiet stillness of the night, the presence of a weapon beside the bed reminded people that even while they slept, they remained ready to protect their homes, their families, and their fragile peace in a world filled with uncertainty. In many ways, the medieval night created a strange balance between peace and uncertainty. After sunset, the busy sounds of village life slowly faded away. The hammering of blacksmiths stopped. Farmers returned from their fields. Animals settled into their pens, and the narrow paths between houses grew quiet. Families finished their evening meals and gathered near the hearth for warmth and conversation before preparing to sleep. Yet despite this calm atmosphere, there was always a quiet awareness that the night could change suddenly. Because of that awareness, many people placed a weapon within reach before closing their eyes. Part of this habit came from generations of experience passed down through families. Parents taught their children that the night required caution. A father might explain to his son that thieves preferred darkness, or that animals often approached villages when human activity was low. These lessons were not meant to frighten children, but to prepare them for the realities of life. Over time, these ideas became deeply embedded in daily routines. Just as someone might check that the door was barred before sleeping, they might also make sure a knife, spear, or staff rested nearby. Medieval nights were also a time when sounds seemed louder and more mysterious. Without the constant background noise of modern cities, cars, electricity, distant machines, even small sounds could travel far. The creak of a cartwheel miles away, the snapping of a twig in a nearby forest, or the howl of a wolf echoing across fields could wake a sleeping villager. In the silence of the night, the human imagination sometimes filled in the unknown with possibilities. Was that just the wind moving through the trees? Or was someone walking along the road? Was the noise outside the barn caused by an animal, or by someone attempting to steal livestock? These uncertainties encouraged people to remain prepared. Another factor that made weapons near the bed useful was the possibility of sudden disturbances within the household itself. Medieval homes often contained animals, storage areas and living spaces all close together. Chickens might wander inside, or dogs might bark if they sensed movement outside. If an animal panicked during the night, the noise could wake everyone in the house. When people woke suddenly to chaos or confusion, the instinct to reach for a weapon provided a sense of control while they figured out what had happened. The relationship between villagers and the surrounding landscape also played a role. As the medieval night moved toward its deepest hours, the stillness of the village could feel almost overwhelming. After the fires burned low and the final candlelight flickered out, homes were wrapped in darkness that modern people rarely experience. Outside, the sky stretched wide above fields and forests, and the faint glow of stars was often the only light guiding the landscape. In that quiet world, every household understood that while they slept, the rest of nature continued moving through the darkness. Because of this, many people chose to keep a weapon close by as they rested, not out of constant fear, but out of a deep sense of caution that had developed over generations. The medieval household was a place where survival and daily life were closely connected. The same space where families cooked meals, repaired tools, and shared stories around the fire was also where they slept. There were no separate security systems or protective barriers dividing the household from the outside world. The walls were often made of wood, clay, or simple stone, strong enough to provide shelter, but not always strong enough to stop someone determined to enter. In such a setting, personal readiness became more important than the structure of the building itself. A weapon within arm's reach served as the final safeguard if something disturbed the peace of the night. One of the reasons this practice remained common was the simple unpredictability of medieval life. People lived in a world where news travelled slowly and dangers could appear without warning. A traveller might bring stories of trouble in nearby towns, or rumours might spread about bandits along certain roads. Even if those threats never reached a particular village, the knowledge that such things existed encouraged people to remain cautious. The weapon beside the bed was not necessarily meant to be used every night, but it reminded people that they were prepared if the unexpected happened. The presence of animals in medieval communities also contributed to the need for readiness. Livestock was extremely valuable, and many families kept animals close to their homes for protection. Chickens, goats, pigs, and sheep often slept in nearby enclosures or small barns attached to the house. During the night, These animals sometimes reacted to movement, long before humans noticed anything unusual. If a dog barked suddenly or livestock began making distressed noises, someone in the household might wake immediately. Before stepping outside to investigate the disturbance, they would instinctively reach for the weapon nearby. Medieval nights were also filled with subtle sounds that could easily wake a sleeping person. The wind brushing against wooden walls, branches scraping against roofs, or distant animals calling through the darkness created an atmosphere where silence was rarely absolute. People grew accustomed to these noises, but when something unfamiliar broke the pattern, it caught attention quickly. In those moments of uncertainty, having a weapon nearby transformed fear into readiness, allowing a person to move through the dark with greater confidence. Another reason people slept with weapons nearby was the simple value of the items inside their homes. Even though many medieval households were modest, the objects they owned represented enormous effort. A set of tools, a bag of grain, a cloak for winter, or a few coins saved from trade could take months of labor to acquire. Losing such possessions to theft could have serious consequences. Because of this, protecting the household during the night became a priority. And the weapon beside the bed served as a final line of defense. The social structure of medieval villages also played a role in shaping these habits. Communities were tightly connected, and neighbors relied on each other in times of trouble. If someone shouted for help during the night, nearby residents might rush to assist. However, those first moments before help arrived were critical. A family facing danger had to hold their ground long enough for others to respond. Having a weapon ready ensured they could defend themselves during those important first moments. In some areas, local customs and laws encouraged people to remain armed as part of their duty to the community. Villagers were sometimes expected to assist in defending the settlement if threats appeared. Because of this expectation, many households already possessed basic weapons such as spears, bows, or swords. Storing them near sleeping areas simply made sense, ensuring they could be used quickly if an alarm spread through the village. The psychological aspect of this habit was equally important. Medieval life involved many challenges that were difficult to control. Harsh winters, unpredictable harvests, and illness could disrupt families without warning. In such a world, small actions that increased security carried great emotional value. Sleeping with a weapon nearby offered a quiet sense of reassurance. It reminded people that even in the vulnerable state of sleep, they had taken steps to protect themselves and those they cared about. Travelers and merchants who spent nights away from home followed similar habits. When resting in unfamiliar inns or roadside shelters, they often kept their daggers or knives close while sleeping. The road taught them that caution was essential, especially when surrounded by strangers. This practice eventually became part of the wider culture, reinforcing the idea that a weapon nearby during sleep was simply wise preparation. Despite these precautions, most medieval nights passed without incident. Villages remained peaceful, and the sounds of the countryside slowly blended into the background of sleep. The weapon beside the bed stayed untouched, resting quietly through the long hours until dawn. Yet its presence still mattered, offering a silent reminder that safety depended on awareness as much as luck. When the first light of morning finally appeared on the horizon, the atmosphere of the village changed again. Darkness retreated, and the familiar activity of daily life returned. Farmers stepped into the fields, craftsmen prepared their tools, and merchants began their journeys along the roads. The weapons that had rested beside beds during the night returned to their ordinary places, once again becoming tools of work or travel. But as evening approached, and the sun slowly dipped below the hills, the quiet routine repeated itself. Families closed their doors, lowered the flames of the hearth, and prepared to sleep. Somewhere near the place where they rested, a weapon remained within reach, silent, ordinary, and rarely used. Yet in the uncertain world of the medieval night, its presence was enough to remind them that even in the deepest darkness, they were ready to defend the fragile peace of their home. As the medieval night stretched into the quiet hours after midnight, when most of the village had long since fallen asleep, the world outside often felt both peaceful and uneasy at the same time. The wind might move softly through the fields. The occasional owl might call from a distant tree, and somewhere a dog might bark briefly before settling again. For many people, these sounds were part of the familiar rhythm of rural life. Yet even within that calm atmosphere, the possibility of sudden disturbance was always present. That lingering uncertainty was one of the reasons many medieval people preferred to sleep, with a weapon close at hand. The idea of personal vigilance was deeply rooted in medieval culture. Unlike modern societies where security is often handled by organized systems and institutions, medieval communities depended heavily on individual awareness. Each household functioned almost like a small unit responsible for its own protection. If danger appeared during the night, the people inside the home were the first and often the only line of defense. This understanding shaped the nightly habits of families across villages and towns. When evening approached, people gradually prepared their homes for the night. Doors were barred from the inside with wooden beams, shutters were closed, and fires were carefully reduced so that they would not grow out of control while everyone slept. These actions created a sense of safety, but they were not considered complete protection. A determined intruder could still force open a door or window if they tried hard enough. Because of this, people often kept a weapon nearby as a final precaution, ensuring they could respond quickly if something went wrong. Another reason this practice remained common was the unpredictability of medieval travel. Roads were long and poorly lit, and travellers sometimes arrived in villages much later than expected. When someone unfamiliar appeared after dark, villagers approached the situation cautiously. A knock on the door during the middle of the night might be a traveller seeking help, but it could also be someone with less honest intentions. Opening the door while holding a weapon nearby provided reassurance that the household was prepared for whatever situation might unfold. In many homes, the weapon kept beside the bed was not particularly large or dramatic. A simple knife or dagger was often enough. These tools were already used daily for practical tasks such as cutting food, repairing equipment, or preparing materials for work. Because they were part of everyday life, keeping one nearby during sleep did not feel unusual. In fact, it often felt more natural than storing it somewhere far away, where it would be difficult to reach in an emergency. The presence of livestock near homes also influenced nighttime behavior. Animals were essential to medieval survival, providing food, labor, and economic stability. If something disturbed them during the night, their noises could quickly wake the household. A frightened goat, a restless horse, or a barking dog might signal. As the night moved toward its quietest and darkest hours, the medieval village often seemed almost frozen in time. The fires inside homes burned down to faint embers. The wind moved slowly through narrow streets, and the sounds of the daytime world disappeared completely. In that deep silence, the smallest disturbance could feel significant. A loose shutter tapping against a wall, a sudden movement outside the door, or a dog barking somewhere down the road could instantly wake a light sleeper. In those moments, people did not want to feel helpless or unprepared. That is why many kept a weapon within reach while they slept. In medieval life, preparedness was not considered a sign of fear, but a sign of wisdom. Communities believed that responsible people took steps to protect their homes and families, even when danger was unlikely. This mindset developed over generations as people learned from real experiences. A household that had once faced thieves, predators, or sudden disturbances during the night would remember the lesson for years afterward. Parents passed these lessons down to their children, and eventually the habit of sleeping with a weapon nearby became part of everyday life. The construction of medieval houses also influenced this behavior. Homes were often built using materials that were available locally: wood, clay, straw, and sometimes stone. While these structures provided warmth and shelter, they were not always designed with strong defensive features. Doors could sometimes be forced open, and walls were not always thick enough to prevent someone from breaking through if they were determined. Because of this, people relied more on awareness and readiness than on the strength of their buildings. Another important factor was the importance of protecting personal reputation and honor. In medieval society, being able to defend one's household was considered an important responsibility. A person who allowed thieves or troublemakers to enter their home without resistance might be viewed as careless or weak by others in the community. Keeping a weapon close during sleep demonstrated that the household was prepared to defend itself if necessary. It was a quiet but powerful signal that the family took their responsibility seriously. The medieval countryside also contained many unpredictable elements. Travelers, merchants, and messengers moved constantly along roads connecting villages and towns. While most of these people were honest individuals simply trying to reach their destination, there was always the possibility that someone with bad intentions might appear. When unfamiliar footsteps approached a house late at night, people wanted to be ready. Even if the visitor turned out to be harmless, having a weapon nearby ensured that the situation could be handled with confidence. Weather conditions could also create moments of alarm during the night. Strong winds sometimes rattled doors and shook wooden beams, while storms could cause branches or loose objects to strike the walls of a house. When someone woke suddenly to loud noises during such weather, they might not immediately know whether the sound came from the storm or from something more dangerous. Reaching for the weapon beside the bed was often the first instinct before investigating the disturbance. Another reason weapons remained close during sleep was the need to protect stored supplies. Medieval families worked extremely hard to produce and preserve food for the future. Grain, dried meat, and other resources were often stored inside the house or in nearby structures. These supplies represented survival during difficult seasons. If someone attempted to steal them during the night, the loss could threaten the family's well-being. Having a weapon nearby allowed people to confront anyone attempting such theft. In some villages, People also took turns keeping watch during particularly tense periods, such as times of conflict or when rumors of bandits spread through the region. Even when someone else was assigned to watch the streets, households still kept their own weapons nearby while sleeping. The night watch could warn of approaching danger, but individuals still needed to be prepared to defend their homes. Interestingly, this habit was not always driven by constant anxiety. For many people, it was simply routine, like placing tools in a familiar spot before going to bed. The weapon beside the bed blended naturally into the surroundings of the home. It might rest quietly against a wooden beam, lie on a small stool, or hang from a hook on the wall. Over time, its presence became so normal that people rarely thought about it unless they truly needed it. The long hours of darkness during winter months made this practice even more meaningful. In some regions, winter nights lasted for many hours, leaving people asleep in darkness for much longer periods. During those long nights, the sense of vulnerability could feel stronger, especially when snow or storms isolated villages from one another. The weapon beside the bed served as a reminder that even in isolation, the household remained capable of defending itself. For travelers who spent nights in unfamiliar places, this habit was even more important. Inns sometimes hosted many strangers under one roof, and while most people behaved honestly, there was always the possibility of theft. Travelers often slept with their belongings close and their weapons within reach, ensuring they could react quickly if someone attempted to steal during the night. Yet, despite all these precautions, the majority of medieval nights passed peacefully. The quiet rhythm of the countryside continued undisturbed, and families slept soundly after long days of work. The weapons beside their beds remained untouched, silent witnesses to the calm hours of the night. When the first signs of dawn appeared, perhaps the distant crow of a rooster, or the faint glow of light in the eastern sky, the village slowly awakened. Doors opened, smoke rose from chimneys, and people stepped outside to begin another day. The weapons that had rested beside beds during the night returned to their ordinary roles as tools, walking staffs, or hunting equipment. But when evening arrived again, and shadows stretched across the land, the same quiet routine repeated itself. Families prepared their homes for sleep, lowering the flames of the hearth and securing their doors. And beside many beds, a familiar object remained within reach. Not because it was expected to be used, but because in the medieval world, preparation was simply a part of living wisely. So night after night, generation after generation, medieval people rested knowing that even in their sleep, they had taken one small step to protect the fragile safety of their home, in a world where darkness still carried many unknowns. As the night deepened further, and the village settled into its quiet rhythm, medieval households entered a time when the world felt both calm and uncertain at once. Outside, the moon might illuminate rooftops and narrow pathways, casting long shadows across barns and fences. On nights when clouds covered the sky, however, the darkness could become almost complete. In such moments, even familiar surroundings became difficult to recognize. A tree near the house might appear like a moving figure in the wind, and distant sounds could seem closer than they really were. Living in such an environment naturally encouraged people to remain cautious, even during the hours meant for rest, because medieval communities lived so closely with nature. They were accustomed to responding quickly when something unusual happened. If a dog barked repeatedly during the night, it could signal that someone or something had entered the area. Dogs were often the first to notice movement in the dark, and their barking sometimes woke entire households. When someone woke suddenly to such sounds, the instinct to reach for a weapon was almost automatic. Before stepping outside to see what had disturbed the animals, a person wanted to be prepared for whatever they might encounter. In many cases, the weapons kept beside beds were also tools used earlier in the day. A small axe might have been used for chopping wood in the afternoon and then placed near the sleeping area at night. A sturdy staff used while walking through fields might lean against the wall beside the bed. Because these items were already part of everyday work, keeping them close during sleep did not feel unusual or excessive. It was simply practical. Medieval people were also deeply aware that nighttime could create opportunities for mischief or crime. Darkness offered a level of concealment that daylight never allowed. Someone with bad intentions could approach quietly, moving between houses or along fences without being seen easily. While villages often relied on trust and cooperation among neighbors, people still recognized that not everyone who passed through the area could be trusted completely. A weapon nearby gave them the ability to respond quickly if a situation turned dangerous. The importance of protecting family members played a large role in this habit as well. Parents knew that children sleeping nearby depended entirely on the adults in the household for safety. If something disturbed the home during the night, children might wake frightened and confused, unsure of what was happening. In those first moments, it was the responsibility of the adults to act calmly and decisively. Having a weapon close at hand meant they could focus on protecting their family rather than searching through the dark for something to defend themselves with. Another reason weapons were kept nearby was the simple unpredictability of accidents during the night. Fires were an ever-present risk in homes lit by open flames. If someone woke to the smell of smoke or the sound of burning wood, they might need to act quickly to break apart burning. As the final hours of night approached and the medieval countryside remained wrapped in darkness, the quiet of the world often felt almost sacred. The fires in most homes had faded to dim orange embers, and the only light left in many houses came from the faint glow of the hearth. Outside, the sky stretched endlessly above the village, sometimes filled with stars and sometimes hidden behind drifting clouds. In that stillness, people slept deeply after long days of physical labor. Yet even in sleep, many households kept a small measure of preparedness close by, a weapon resting quietly beside the bed. This habit was shaped by centuries of living in an environment where safety could never be completely guaranteed. Medieval people understood that the night belonged as much to the unknown as it did to rest. Darkness created opportunities for both natural dangers and human mischief. Because of this, they developed routines that balanced peace with caution. Placing a weapon within reach before sleep became one of those routines, repeated so often that it felt as natural as locking the door or checking the fire. One reason this practice endured was the way medieval communities relied heavily on individual responsibility. Villages did not have centralized protection systems that watched over every household. There were no patrol cars, alarm systems, or emergency numbers to call. Instead, each family functioned as its own guardian during the night. If someone tried to enter the home, or if a disturbance occurred nearby, the people inside had to respond first. Having a weapon nearby meant they were ready to act without losing precious moments, searching for something to defend themselves with. The closeness between people and their animals also influenced nighttime habits. Livestock represented wealth and survival, and many families kept their animals in barns or enclosures close to the house. Animals often sensed danger earlier than humans. If a predator approached or a stranger moved quietly near the property, livestock might grow restless or begin making unusual sounds. A barking dog or a startled horse could wake the household quickly. When someone stepped outside to investigate the noise, carrying a weapon provided reassurance and protection in the dark. Medieval homes were often simple structures, built quickly and repaired whenever necessary. While they provided shelter from weather, they were not always designed to resist intrusion. A strong push could sometimes break a door latch, and wooden walls were not impossible to damage. Because people understood these limitations, they relied on vigilance rather than architecture for security. The weapon beside the bed served as the final layer of defense if the house itself failed to keep danger out. Another important factor was the unpredictability of the world beyond the village. Roads connected settlements across long distances, and travellers constantly moved between them. Most travellers were honest merchants, pilgrims, or workers, but villagers could not always know the intentions of someone who arrived after sunset. If footsteps approached a house late at night or someone knocked on the door in darkness, the household responded carefully. A weapon nearby ensured that even if the visitor turned out to be harmless, the family remained prepared for the unexpected. Medieval life also taught people to respect the power of nature. Storms could arrive suddenly during the night, shaking roofs and rattling doors. Strong winds sometimes knocked objects against houses or caused trees to creak and shift in the darkness. When someone woke to such noises, they could not immediately know whether the sound came from weather or from something else. Reaching for the weapon beside the bed gave them confidence while they determined what had caused the disturbance. The value of personal belongings also made protection important. Even though many medieval households owned relatively few items, those possessions represented countless hours of labor. A farmer's tools stored grain, warm clothing, or a few coins saved from trade were essential to survival. Losing them could create serious hardship. Because theft could occur quietly during the night, people remained ready to defend what they had worked so hard to obtain. Cultural attitudes toward responsibility also reinforced this behavior. Medieval societies often valued courage and preparedness. Being capable of defending one's household was seen as an important duty. The weapon beside the bed symbolized that duty in a quiet and practical way. It reminded the household that safety depended not only on luck, but also on readiness. For travelers and merchants sleeping away from home, this habit became even more essential. Inns and roadside shelters sometimes held many strangers resting in the same room. Although most people respected one another's property, the risk of theft still existed. Travelers who had spent long days on dangerous roads often slept with their daggers or knives close by, ensuring they could respond quickly if someone attempted to steal their belongings. Despite all these reasons for caution, the medieval night was not always filled with tension. In many villages, evenings were peaceful and quiet. Families slept deeply, trusting that their preparations were enough to keep them safe. The weapon beside the bed often remained untouched, resting silently through the long hours until morning. Yet even unused, its presence mattered. It represented awareness in a world where darkness still carried mystery. It reminded people that even during sleep, they had taken steps to protect their homes and families. In a time without modern security systems or organized protection, such small habits provided reassurance. And so, when the first light of dawn finally appeared, and the sounds of morning slowly filled the village, the crowing of roosters, the creak of doors opening, and the footsteps of farmers heading to their fields, the quiet tension of the night faded away. The weapons that had rested beside beds were returned to their usual roles as tools, walking staffs, or hunting blades. But when evening came again, and shadows slowly covered the land, families repeated the same simple routine that generations before them had followed. Fires were lowered, doors were secured, and beside many beds, a familiar object remained within reach. It was rarely used, almost never noticed, yet always present, standing as a quiet reminder that in the medieval world, even the act of sleeping carried with it the responsibility of being ready for whatever the night might bring. As the quietest hours of the night settled over the medieval landscape, the village often seemed to exist in a delicate balance between rest and watchfulness. Most homes had long since gone dark, and the people inside slept after exhausting days of labour in fields, workshops and markets. Yet even while resting, the world outside continued to move. The wind brushed across rooftops, animals wandered through fields, and distant sounds echoed across the countryside. In this environment, people learned that the night was never completely still. Because of that, many medieval households maintained the habit of keeping a weapon close by as they slept. The medieval mindset was shaped by a strong awareness that safety could never be taken entirely for granted. Life was deeply connected to the rhythms of nature and the unpredictability of human behavior. Unlike the structured systems of protection that many societies rely on today, medieval communities depended largely on their own readiness. If something unusual happened during the night, the people inside the house were responsible for responding first. The weapon beside the bed was simply one way to ensure they could act quickly if necessary. Another reason this habit remained common was the way medieval people understood the concept of vulnerability. Sleep is a state in which humans naturally lower their guard, becoming less aware of their surroundings. In a world where dangers sometimes appeared without warning, people wanted to reduce that vulnerability as much as possible. Having a weapon within reach meant that even if someone woke suddenly from sleep, they would not be completely defenseless. The design of medieval villages also contributed to this sense of cautious readiness. Homes were often built along narrow pathways with barns, storage areas, and animal enclosures located nearby. During the night, movement in any of these places could signal a problem. A thief might attempt to steal livestock. An animal might break loose from its enclosure, or a stranger might wander into the settlement. If someone woke to unusual sounds, they often reached for the weapon near their bed before stepping outside to investigate. The medieval countryside itself added to the unpredictability of nighttime life. Forests, rivers, and open fields surrounded many villages, creating environments where animals and travelers moved freely after dark. Wolves and wild dogs sometimes came close to farms, drawn by the scent of livestock. Foxes searched quietly for chickens, and other animals wandered through fields while humans slept. While attacks on people were not extremely common, the possibility was enough to keep households alert. Another reason weapons remained nearby during sleep was the importance of guarding stored resources. Medieval families worked extremely hard to produce and preserve food. Grain, salted meat, dried vegetables, and other supplies were often stored inside the house or in nearby structures. These resources were essential for surviving long winters or periods of poor harvest. If someone attempted to steal them during the night, the loss could threaten the entire household. Being able to respond quickly to such threats was therefore very important. Travel also played a role in shaping this practice. As the medieval night moved toward its final and quietest stretch before dawn, the world often felt suspended in a strange stillness. The village streets were empty, the doors of homes remained tightly shut, and most fires had burned down to a soft glow that barely lit the rooms they warmed. Outside, the darkness spread across fields and forests like a vast blanket, and the silence could be so deep that even the smallest sound seemed unusually loud. In that quiet environment, people understood that although the night could be peaceful, it could also change without warning. Because of that possibility, many households made sure a weapon rested nearby while they slept. The habit was deeply connected to the way medieval people thought about responsibility. Life in that period required individuals to take care of their own safety in ways that modern societies rarely demand. Communities supported each other, but help could not always arrive immediately. If someone attempted to break into a house during the night, or if danger approached unexpectedly, the people inside the home had to respond first. A weapon beside the bed allowed them to react quickly, rather than losing precious moments searching for something to defend themselves with. Another reason for keeping weapons nearby was the close relationship between medieval homes and the surrounding countryside. Many houses stood near barns, fields, and small enclosures where animals were kept. Livestock was extremely valuable and often represented a family's main source of food and income. During the night, animals sometimes reacted strongly to unfamiliar movements. If chickens fluttered wildly in their coop or a horse began stamping nervously in the stable, the noise could wake the household. When someone stepped outside into the darkness to investigate the disturbance, carrying a weapon helped them feel more secure. Medieval people were also very aware of how easily darkness could hide approaching danger. During the day, anyone walking toward a house could be seen clearly from a distance. But once night fell, visibility disappeared. Someone could move quietly through shadows and come very close before being noticed. Because of this, people relied less on sight and more on readiness. The weapon beside the bed was not just a tool. It was a way of ensuring that even in the worst moment of surprise, the household would not be defenseless. The design of medieval homes made this kind of readiness especially important. Many houses had only one main door and a few small openings for light or air. If someone forced their way inside, the occupants had very little time to react. Having a weapon nearby meant that they could defend themselves immediately, protecting both their belongings and their family members. There was also a cultural element that encouraged this practice. Medieval societies often valued courage, preparedness, and the ability to protect one's household. Being capable of defending one's home was seen as a sign of responsibility and strength. A weapon kept beside the bed quietly reflected that attitude. It was a reminder that protecting the family was a duty that continued even while resting. Travellers played a role in shaping these habits as well. Roads during the medieval period were often long, rough, and poorly marked. People travelling between towns sometimes arrived late at night after difficult journeys. When strangers appeared at a village door after dark, the household inside approached the situation carefully. While hospitality was an important tradition, caution was equally important. Having a weapon nearby allowed villagers to greet late night visitors without feeling completely vulnerable. The natural world also contributed to the atmosphere of medieval nights. Forests were home to animals that were active after sunset, and those animals sometimes came close to human settlements. Wolves, foxes, and other predators occasionally approached farms, searching for easy prey among livestock. Even if attacks on humans were uncommon, the presence of these animals was enough to keep villagers alert. A weapon nearby meant that if someone needed to step outside to protect their animals, they could do so with confidence. Weather sometimes created similar moments of alarm. Strong winds could rattle doors, knock objects against walls, or cause branches to scrape across roofs. When someone woke suddenly to such noises, it could take a moment to understand what had caused them. Reaching for the weapon beside the bed became almost instinctive before investigating the disturbance. Interestingly, the presence of weapons near sleeping areas did not always mean that people expected violence every night. For many households, it was simply a habit, something done automatically at the end of the day. Just as people checked that the fire was safe and the door was secured, they also ensured that a weapon was close by. Over time, this routine became so ordinary that it hardly required thought. In many villages, the quiet hours of the night passed without any trouble at all. The wind moved softly through fields, animals settled into their rest, and families slept peacefully until morning. The weapons beside their beds remained untouched, silent companions through the darkness. Yet those objects still carried meaning. They represented awareness in a world where certainty was rare. They reminded people that even while they slept, they had taken steps to protect themselves and their loved ones. In an era without modern security systems or organized protection, such simple habits provided a sense of control over an unpredictable environment. And so when dawn finally arrived, and the first pale light appeared above the horizon, the village slowly awakened. Doors creaked open, smoke rose from chimneys, and the sounds of daily work returned. The weapons that had rested beside beds during the night were picked up again and used for ordinary tasks, cutting tools, walking staffs, or hunting blades. But when evening returned, and darkness slowly spread across the countryside once more, families repeated the same quiet routine that generations before them had followed. Fires were lowered, doors were secured, and beside many beds, a familiar weapon remained within reach. Most nights it would never be needed, but in the medieval world, where the silence of the night could hide both peace and uncertainty, its presence was enough to remind people that they were prepared for whatever might emerge from the darkness. As the night in the medieval world slowly drifted toward the early hours before sunrise, A quiet stillness often settled over villages and farmhouses. The fires that had warmed the homes earlier in the evening were now little more than glowing embers, and the faint smell of wood smoke lingered in the air. Outside, the land stretched into darkness, fields blending into forests, narrow paths disappearing into shadow, and the outlines of barns and fences barely visible under the moon or stars. It was a peaceful scene, but medieval people knew that peace at night could be fragile. Because of that understanding, many of them rested with a weapon close at hand, even while they slept. This habit was not necessarily born from constant fear, but from a long tradition of preparedness. Generations of people had lived through moments when danger appeared suddenly in the night, whether from thieves, wandering animals, or unexpected travelers. Those experiences shaped how communities thought about safety. Over time, small habits formed to reduce risk, and one of those habits was keeping something nearby that could serve as protection if needed. The medieval world was a place where individuals had to rely heavily on themselves, while neighbours supported one another, and villages formed tight communities. Help was rarely immediate. If a disturbance occurred during the night, there was no organised force that could respond within minutes. A family had to face the situation on its own, at least at first. Because of that, the first few moments after waking to a strange sound could be extremely important. Having a weapon nearby allowed someone to act quickly, without wasting time searching in the dark. Darkness itself was a powerful factor in shaping these habits. Without electric lights or illuminated streets, the medieval night was much darker than what most people experience today. Even a familiar yard or pathway could look completely different after sunset. Shapes became uncertain, and movement in the shadows could easily go unnoticed. If someone approached a house quietly, they might reach the door or window before anyone inside realized they were there. For that reason, people relied more on readiness than on visibility. The presence of animals around homes also played a role in how people prepared for the night. Dogs, chickens, goats, and other animals often slept close to human dwellings. These animals sometimes reacted strongly to unfamiliar sounds or movement. A barking dog or a frightened flock of chickens could quickly wake the household. When someone stepped outside to investigate the disturbance, carrying a weapon offered both protection and reassurance. Medieval homes themselves were rarely designed for strong defense. Many were constructed from wood and other materials that were practical, but not particularly secure against forced entry. Doors were often held shut with simple bars, and windows were small openings rather than reinforced structures. If someone truly wanted to break in, it was sometimes possible with enough effort. Because of this, people understood that the real defense of the home rested with those who lived inside it. Another reason weapons remained nearby was the value of what was kept inside the house. Even modest families owned tools, food supplies, and clothing that represented months of hard work. As the darkest portion of the night slowly passed, and the world waited for the faint glow of dawn, medieval villages remained wrapped in deep silence. In many homes, families slept closely together beneath simple blankets, exhausted from long days of labour in fields, workshops, or markets. Outside, the land stretched quietly into darkness, broken only by the distant sounds of wind, animals, or the occasional creak of wooden structures shifting in the cool night air. Even though the scene might appear peaceful, Medieval people understood that the calm of the night could sometimes hide unexpected events. Because of this, many households kept a weapon nearby as they slept. This habit was rooted in a practical understanding of the world around them. Medieval life did not offer the layers of protection that people often rely on today. There were no alarm systems, no emergency services that could arrive quickly, and no bright lights illuminating every corner of the village. When darkness fell, visibility disappeared, and the responsibility for safety rested largely with each individual household. If something unusual happened during the night, the family inside the home had to respond immediately. The medieval night also had a way of amplifying small sounds. With no engines, electricity, or constant background noise, the countryside could become incredibly quiet after sunset. In that silence, even minor disturbances stood out clearly. The crunch of footsteps on gravel, the rustling of bushes near a fence, or the sudden cry of an animal could wake a light sleeper. When someone awoke to such sounds, their first instinct was often to reach for the weapon beside the bed before trying to understand what had caused the disturbance. Weapons kept near sleeping areas were usually simple and practical. Many households owned knives that were used throughout the day for preparing food or repairing equipment. Others kept staffs or spears that were useful for walking through fields or protecting livestock. Because these items were already part of daily life, placing them near the bed at night did not feel unusual. They were tools first, but tools that could also serve as protection if necessary. Another reason for this practice was the closeness between homes and valuable resources. Medieval families often stored grain, tools, clothing, and other important items within the same building where they slept. These possessions represented months or even years of effort. Losing them to theft could have serious consequences, since thieves sometimes took advantage of darkness to move quietly through villages. People remained prepared to defend what they owned. Livestock also required protection during the night. Chickens, goats, pigs, and other animals were essential to survival, providing food and income. Many families kept these animals close to their homes, so they could monitor them easily. If animals became restless or frightened during the night, their noises might signal that something unusual was happening outside. When someone stepped out to check on the animals, carrying a weapon helped ensure that they could handle any threat that appeared. The design of medieval homes made personal readiness even more important. Most houses were simple structures with wooden doors and small openings rather than strong fortified walls. If someone attempted to break in, the occupants would have very little time to react. Keeping a weapon nearby meant they could respond quickly without needing to search for protection in the darkness. Another factor influencing this habit was the constant movement of travellers along medieval roads. Merchants, pilgrims, messengers, and workers moved between towns regularly. Sometimes these travellers arrived at villages late at night after difficult journeys. While many villages believed in offering hospitality, they also approached unfamiliar visitors carefully. When someone knocked on a door after dark, the household inside often felt safer knowing that a weapon was close at hand. The natural world surrounding medieval communities added to the sense of caution. Forests and fields were active environments during the night, filled with animals searching for food or territory. Wolves, foxes, and other predators occasionally approached farms looking for livestock. Even if such encounters were rare, people remained alert. The weapon beside the bed, allowed them to investigate disturbances with confidence rather than fear. Despite all these reasons for caution, the medieval night was often calm and uneventful. Many evenings passed quietly, with nothing unusual happening at all. Families slept peacefully, and the sounds of the countryside blended into the rhythm of rest. The weapons placed beside beds remained untouched through the long hours of darkness. Still, their presence served an important purpose. They represented preparation in a world where certainty was never guaranteed. They reminded people that even while they slept, they had taken steps to protect their homes and families. In a time when survival depended greatly on personal vigilance, such small actions provided reassurance. When dawn finally approached and the sky began to brighten with the first light of morning, the quiet tension of the night slowly faded. Villagers rose from their beds, opened their doors, and stepped outside to begin another day of work. The weapons that had rested beside beds during the night returned to their ordinary uses as tools or travel companions. Yet as evening returned once again and darkness spread across the land, the same routine quietly repeated itself. Fires were lowered, doors were secured, and beside many beds a familiar weapon remained within reach. Most nights it would never be needed. But in the medieval world, where the silence of the night could hold both peace and uncertainty, its presence offered comfort, reminding people that even in sleep they were ready to defend the fragile safety of their home. As the final hours before sunrise approached, the medieval night often reached its deepest calm. The entire village seemed to pause in a moment of stillness. The glow of hearth fires faded into faint red embers, the cool air settled across rooftops, and the only movement outside might be the drifting clouds, or the quiet wandering of animals through distant fields. Yet even in this peaceful silence, medieval people knew that the night could hold surprises. Because of that understanding, many families continued the quiet tradition of keeping a weapon close while they slept. For people living in the medieval world, caution was not something practiced only during times of danger. It was woven into the ordinary rhythm of daily life. Just as farmers checked their tools before beginning work or merchants counted their coins before closing their shops, families prepared their homes before going to sleep. They ensured the door was secured, the fire was safe, and that something capable of defense rested within reach. These habits developed slowly over generations, shaped by experience, and the lessons passed down through families. The darkness of the medieval night was very different from what most people experience today. Without streetlights or glowing windows across a city, nightfall transformed the landscape almost completely. The roads that had been busy with travellers during the day became empty and nearly invisible. Trees along the edges of fields formed dark silhouettes against the sky, and even familiar paths could appear unfamiliar in the dim light of the moon. In such conditions it was easy for someone, or something, to approach quietly without being noticed until the last moment. This environment naturally encouraged people to remain prepared. If a strange noise woke someone during the night, their senses sharpened quickly. It might be something harmless, the shifting of a wooden beam, the rustling of wind through straw roofs, or an animal moving near the house. But until the cause was known, people preferred not to investigate without protection. Reaching for the weapon beside the bed was often the first instinct before stepping into the darkness. The importance of protecting family members was another powerful reason behind this habit. Medieval homes often contained several people sleeping in the same space, parents, children, and sometimes elderly relatives all sharing a room. If danger appeared during the night, the responsibility for protecting everyone fell immediately upon the adults who woke first. Having a weapon nearby meant they could act quickly to keep their family safe. Another reason weapons were kept close was the unpredictability of the medieval countryside. Villages were connected by long roads that passed through forests, hills, and open land. Travellers sometimes moved along these roads late into the night, especially if they had been delayed by weather or difficult terrain. While many travellers were honest people simply trying to reach their destination, villagers could not always know the intentions of someone approaching in darkness. If a knock came at the door during the middle of the night, the household inside often felt more secure, knowing they were prepared for any outcome. Livestock protection also played a role in shaping nighttime habits. Animals such as chickens, goats, and pigs were essential to survival, providing food and trade opportunities. Many families kept these animals close to their homes, so they could hear if something disturbed them. If the animals suddenly became restless or frightened, it might signal that a predator or thief had entered the area. When someone stepped outside to check on the animals, carrying a weapon provided both confidence and protection. Medieval people also understood that the quiet of the night could sometimes attract those looking for opportunities to steal. Darkness offered concealment that daylight did not. As the final stretch of night lingered just before the first hint of morning, the medieval countryside often felt suspended in a deep and almost timeless quiet. The sky remained dark, sometimes scattered with stars, and the cool air drifted slowly across fields and rooftops. Inside humble homes, people slept after long days of physical work, their bodies exhausted from labor in fields, workshops, or markets. The warmth of the hearth had faded to soft embers, and the faint glow of that fire barely lit the room. Yet even in that calm moment, many households had a weapon resting within reach of the bed, placed there out of long-standing habit and practical caution. This small detail of medieval life reflected how people understood the world around them. They knew that the night, while often peaceful, could also bring uncertainty. Darkness reduced visibility and made it difficult to know what might be happening outside the walls of the house. A stranger could move quietly through the village, or an animal might wander close to the property without being noticed until the last moment. Because of this, families learned that preparation was one of the best ways to maintain safety. The medieval night was far darker than what people experience today. Without lantern, lit streets, or glowing buildings, most of the countryside disappeared into shadow after sunset. Only the moon or the stars provided faint illumination, and on cloudy nights even that was absent. This darkness made it easy for movement to go unnoticed. Someone approaching a home could remain hidden until they were only a few steps away. In such conditions, people relied not on sight, but on readiness. If a noise disturbed someone during the night, a creaking door, rustling outside the house, or the sudden movement of animals, the person waking often reached instinctively for the weapon beside the bed. This reaction was not necessarily driven by fear, but by the understanding that it was better to be prepared before investigating the disturbance. The The weapon offered reassurance that whatever had caused the noise could be faced confidently. Animals played a significant role in shaping these nighttime habits. Medieval families depended heavily on livestock for survival. Chickens, goats, pigs, and other animals provided food and sometimes income through trade. These animals were often kept close to the house so they could be watched carefully. If a predator approached during the night, the animals would usually react first, creating noise that woke the household. When someone stepped outside to check on the disturbance, carrying a weapon ensured they were ready for any encounter. The structure of medieval homes also encouraged personal readiness. Houses were often built quickly using materials available in the area, such as timber, clay, or straw. While these materials provided warmth and shelter, they were not designed to stop someone determined to enter. A wooden door secured with a bar might slow an intruder, but it could still be broken with enough force. Because people understood these limitations, they relied on their own vigilance as the final layer of protection. Another reason for keeping weapons nearby was the simple value of the possessions inside the home. Medieval households might not have owned many items, but the things they did have were extremely important. Tools used for farming, stored grain, warm clothing for winter, and small savings from trade all represented hard work and survival. Losing these items to theft could cause serious hardship. Being prepared to defend them during the night was therefore seen as sensible. Travel and trade also influenced the cautious atmosphere of nighttime life. Medieval roads connected villages across long distances, and travelers often moved along these routes throughout the day. Sometimes they arrived late at night, seeking shelter or directions. While many villagers believed strongly in offering hospitality, they also approached unfamiliar visitors carefully. A knock on the door after midnight might simply be a weary traveller asking for help, but people preferred to greet such visitors with a weapon nearby, just in case. Cultural values of the time reinforced this attitude of readiness. Medieval communities admired responsibility and courage. Protecting one's household was considered an important duty, and being prepared to defend it showed strength and care for one's family. The weapon beside the bed quietly symbolized this responsibility, reminding people that the safety of the home often depended on their own actions. Despite these precautions, the medieval night was usually peaceful. Most evenings passed without disturbance. Families slept deeply, and the village remained calm until the first signs of morning appeared. The weapons beside the beds remained untouched, silent companions through the long hours of darkness. Still, their presence carried meaning. They represented awareness in a world where certainty was rare. They reminded people that even while resting, they had taken steps to protect their homes and loved ones. In a time when organized protection was limited, such simple preparations offered reassurance. When dawn finally began to brighten the horizon, the atmosphere of the village slowly changed. Roosters crowed, doors opened, and people stepped outside to begin another day of work. The weapons that had rested beside beds during the night were picked up and returned to their everyday uses. Cutting tools, walking staffs, or hunting blades. But when evening came again, and darkness slowly spread across the countryside, the same quiet preparation repeated itself. Fires were lowered, doors were secured, and beside many beds a familiar weapon remained within reach. Most nights it would never be used. Yet in the medieval world, where the silence of the night could hide both peace and uncertainty, its presence provided comfort, the quiet knowledge that even in sleep the household was ready to face whatever might emerge from the shadows of the night. As the medieval night lingered in its final quiet hours before dawn, the world often seemed suspended between darkness and the coming light. The village streets were empty, the doors of homes remained firmly shut, and the faint glow of dying embers in hearths was sometimes the only light inside a house. Outside, the countryside stretched silently under the sky, with fields, trees, and narrow paths blending into shadow. In that calm stillness, families slept deeply after long days of work, but the presence of a weapon beside the bed quietly reflected the reality of the world they lived in. For medieval people, night was not simply a time for rest. It was also a time when the unknown became more powerful. Darkness limited visibility and made it difficult to know what might be happening outside the walls of a home. The absence of artificial lighting meant that even familiar places could appear strange and uncertain after sunset. A tree branch moving in the wind might resemble a person in the distance, and footsteps on a dirt path could echo strangely through the quiet air. Because of this uncertainty, people preferred to remain prepared rather than assume that everything outside was harmless. One of the most important lessons medieval communities learned was that small disturbances could sometimes signal larger problems. A sudden noise outside the house, the restless movement of animals, or the sound of something shifting near the door could wake someone instantly. In those moments, people did not want to step into the darkness unprepared. The weapon beside the bed allowed them to respond immediately, transforming uncertainty into readiness. Animals played an important role in alerting households to possible danger. Dogs in particular were valued not only for companionship, but also for their ability to sense movement and sound long before humans noticed anything unusual. A dog barking suddenly during the night could wake the entire household. Livestock might also react loudly if they sensed a predator nearby. When someone woke to such sounds, reaching for a weapon before investigating became a natural response. The medieval countryside itself was an active place during the night. While people slept, many animals moved through fields and forests searching for food. Foxes might approach chicken coops, wild dogs could wander near farms, and occasionally wolves roamed through rural areas. Although these encounters did not happen every night, they were common enough that villagers remained cautious. Protecting livestock was essential for survival, and stepping outside without protection was considered unwise. Another reason weapons remained nearby during sleep was the unpredictability of human activity after dark. Travelers sometimes moved along roads late into the evening, especially if their journey had been delayed by weather or difficult terrain. When unfamiliar footsteps approached a house during the night, villagers could not immediately know the visitor's intentions. While many travelers were honest people seeking help or shelter, caution was still necessary. A weapon nearby allowed households to approach such situations with confidence. The construction of medieval homes also contributed to this sense of preparedness. Houses were often built using wood, clay, straw, or stone, depending on what materials were available. While these structures provided warmth and shelter, they were not designed to resist determined intruders. Doors were secured with bars or latches, but they could still be broken with enough effort, because people understood the limitations of their homes. They relied on personal readiness as the final safeguard protecting stored supplies, was another important concern. Medieval families often kept grain, dried food, tools, and other valuable items inside their homes or nearby buildings.